Elvis Presley, Paul McCartney, and the 1960s cultural false flag. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, and I'll be right back with more. Elvis Presley and Paul McCartney, probably the two most well-known and arguably greatest rock and roll talents of our entire lives and maybe in all of history, with possible apologies to Michael Jackson, perhaps to Prince, but you get the idea. These two, and if we're talking about the 60s, these two were the guys that were making things happen. They are the two angels of Aquarius. I should say the original angels of Aquarius. And you have to forgive my artwork. This is a project that is still in progress, so we haven't quite smoothed everything out, but this is enough to give you the idea about the 60s cultural false flag. Elvis Presley and Paul McCartney. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower. Welcome to the channel. We invite you to share, like, subscribe, and also ask that you sponsor and become an unindoctrinator so we can get this information out that you're not getting anywhere else and help defeat the final false flag that is heading our way. So this is a work that's almost finished. Probably going to be talking about it on Coast to Coast AM in a couple months. And we're talking about how the 1960s, well, let's just get right into it. And it is a book, and I'm reading from the not quite finished version of that book. And we start off talking about Aquarius, and not in strictly astrological terms, but the idea of the age of Aquarius, the coming of a spiritual renewal in the 1960s. And if you look at Revelation 11:11, which of course, if you know anything about numerology, or if you know anything about the 11:11 phenomenon, is highly significant. Revelation 11:11, I will appoint my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days. This will become very relevant as we continue on with this study. It's 1:18 in the morning, so forgive me if I have a stifle, a yawn here or there. I'm convinced that the 1960s were meant to be one of the greatest times of spiritual renewal in all of human history. Instead, they really turned out to be a missed opportunity for the world to step into a new and higher realm of enlightenment and being. Yes, they did have some effect, but they did not have nearly the effect that they were meant to have. And what this effort is to tell the story for the first time, the full story of what really happened. And it's a story based on a great wealth of inside knowledge that I have about the man I call the first witness, and the extrapolation of that knowledge and its application to the life of the second witness. Now, this story encompasses 2 of history's most beloved icons and the shadowy entities that oppose them and continue to oppose us until this day. This truly is the hidden story of the battle surrounding the dawning of the age of Aquarius in the Western world. So it is quite important, and it is quite an interesting study. Now, I'm talking about a cultural false flag, and you've probably never heard of a cultural false flag before. And of course, just for definitions, the term false flag describes covert operations designed to deceive in such a way that the operations appear as though they're being carried out by entities, groups, or nations other than those who have planned and executed them. Historically, the term false flag has its origins in naval warfare, where the use of a flag other than the belligerent's true battle flag as a ruse de guerre before engaging the enemy has long been accepted. So if they were from France, they might run an English Union Jack and fool somebody. If they were pirates, they might have a flag of a nation. But operations carried out during peacetime by civilian organizations, as well as covert agencies, can, by extension, also be called false flag operations if they seek to hide the real organization behind an operation. That's a false flag in Wikipedia. Now, to my knowledge, the term false flag has never been applied to a cultural event. Yet, it's my assertion in this work that an organized and carefully planned agenda unfolded upon an unsuspecting public from the mid to late 1960s, and that this nefarious orchestration can most accurately be described as a cultural false flag. What was done certainly meets every definition of the term. They were covert operations. They were designed to deceive in such a way that the operations would appear as they were being carried out by others than those who actually planned and executed them. Such operations were demonstrably waged against specific private citizens who were influential enough to cause tremendous sea changes in the attitudes and actions of great numbers and the general populace of the world's two greatest democratic nations, namely the United States of America and, of course, England. Now, both operations were carried out during peacetime by both paragovernmental and civilian organizations, as well as covert governmental agencies. And by extension, they must be termed false flags because they sought to hide the real organizations behind these operations. And the aim of the cultural false flag was to prevent a mass cultural awakening that was both social and spiritual in nature. The cultural false flag of the 1960s was designed to prevent the dawning of the age of Aquarius in the Western world. So we're talking about agencies belligerent to the spiritual evolution and advancement of humanity, binding together very specifically against two great agents of that effort. So again, let's take a quick look at this. When we think of the dawning of the age of Aquarius, we automatically think about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right, of the 1960s. And while that time is the focus of this book, it is important to understand that the party started long before then. A lot of people laid the earlier foundations. And we have to look at people like Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky. She, of course, started the Theosophical Society and could rightly be considered the mother of the New Age. And it's interesting that the Theosophical Society kind of reads like a manifesto of New Age thought, to form a nucleus of the universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. Encourage to study comparative religion. Investigate the unexplained laws of nature. And those ideas are the very bedrock of the attempted spiritual renewal and calls for social change in the 1960s. Edgar Cayce was also a man termed the sleeping prophet. He's the most well-researched and well-documented psychic in all of history. Of Cayce, Wikipedia says, some consider him the true founder of the New Age and a principal source of its most characteristic beliefs. And he was also a devotee of Scripture, by the way. And we should have we should also have in there Manly P. Hall. Manly P. Hall's not in there because, quite frankly, he was outside my scope when I started writing this book, started investigating this information. So you think about Blavatsky, you think about Cayce, you think about Manly P. Hall, and the type of thought and ideas that these people put out there. And they laid the foundation for what Presley and McCartney were able to accomplish, and we'll see what happened to them. Now, there were also some dark lords of the New Age, and we probably understand and know about the Tavistock Institute. Many of you understand who they are. Many of you understand what they were, and they were a bunch of really, really bad guys, to put it in a very base way. Now, the Tavistock Institute is more than just an idea. It's more than a boogeyman. It is an actual place. You see here an entrance, the north entrance of the Tavistock Institute. And what the Tavistock was, it was founded in 1946 as a British charity claiming to devote itself to group and organizational behavior. It became the focal point in Great Britain for the emerging school of psychoanalysis championed by Sigmund Freud and his devotees. Now, the Rough Guide to Conspiracy Theories notes that the Tavistock Institute has been named as the most extravagant anti-illuminary conspiracy theory of John Coleman. The Tavistock Institute has been named by some theorists in their worldviews, including having a part in the most extravagant conspiracy theory of John Coleman, known as the Aquarian Conspiracy, which culminates in the Illuminati taking control of education in America with the intent and purpose of utterly and completely destroying it. Now pay attention to this next part. By means of rock music and drugs, to rebel against the status quo, thus fulfilling and undermining the desire, to undermine the family unit. That was James McConaughey and Robin Tudge. The Tavistock Institute has long been said to have had a particular effect on McCartney and the Beatles. Well, that's a story we'll talk about later. So the Tavistock Institute, a real place, a place of mind, study of mind control, and with particular interest in rock music and drugs as elements of control. MK Ultra is sometimes referred to as the CIA's mind control program, and that's a code name given to the illegal program of experiments on human subjects designed and undertaken by the U.S. CIA. And what we know about it probably pales in comparison to what is not known. Experiments on humans were intended to identify and develop drugs and procedures to be used in interrogation, torture, and in order to weaken the individual to force confessions through mind control. And it was organized, by the U.S. Army Chemical Corps in the early 1950s. And this is something I want you to check out and really get into, really focus on. MK Ultra used numerous methodologies to manipulate people's mental states, alter brain functions, including the surreptitious, that means they didn't know about it, administration of LSD and other chemicals, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal, sexual, and other forms of abuse and torture. Now check this out. This is important. MK Ultra was broad with research undertaken at 80 institutions, 44 colleges and universities, hospitals, prisons, pharmaceutical companies. The CIA operated through these institutions using front organizations, and sometimes these top officials at these institutions were aware of the CIA's involvement. The U.S. Supreme Court later noted that MK Ultra was the research and development arm of chemical, biological, radiological materials capable of employment in clandestine operations to control human behavior. So it's not just a conspiracy nutbag theory. It's something that really happened, and that was from the Wikipedia article, Project MK Ultra. So we've had a look now at the dark chapter of Western Aquarius. We've had a look at some of the original lights of the Western Aquarius. And with that, we're going to take a look at the first angel of Aquarius. And of course, I'm talking about Elvis Aaron Presley. And this is, of course, the Elvis that many people know and love. And this is the Elvis that we're really speaking about as far as the Aquarius angel. You can see this was taken before Presley dyed his hair jet black. So this is a very early Elvis Presley when he was just coming to stardom. And this is the Elvis that we're primarily concerned with, at least at the beginning of this tale. And of course, on August 16th of this year, the 40th anniversary of Elvis's death will be upon us. So I'll appoint my two witnesses. They'll prophesy for 1,260 days, Revelation 11:11, and again the Rough Guide to Conspiracy Theories, by means of rock music to rebel against the status quo. Elvis was born January 8, 1935, one-room shack, wrong side of the tracks, Tupelo, Mississippi. Had a twin that died at birth. And we really want to look at the beginning of Elvis's life and his really more the beginning of his career. I call that Elvis Ascending. His family left Tupelo, Mississippi, lived in a public housing project in Memphis. Presley was driving a truck, and he walked into the Sun Record studio of Sam Phillips. And you know the story. He made the demo record that would change the world. That the two songs he recorded that first day were flip sides on a 45. My Happiness, and That's When Your Heartaches Begin. Almost prophetic in nature as to what was about to happen. And a second demo, I'll Never Stand in Your Way, and It Wouldn't Be the Same Without You. Both of them very, very prophetic, as we'll get to see. Elvis Ascending was the genesis for all the events that would become the 1960s age of Aquarius, both for better and for worse, both for happiness and heartbreak. And My Happiness, within 3 short years of that first demo, Elvis burst upon the world scene with the release of his debut single, Heartbreak Hotel. And of course, Heartbreak Hotel was his breakout hit, and it remains, even to this day, one of the most popular and really one of the most haunting and vocally and musically arresting singles that really we've ever seen in the history of rock and roll music. And Heartbreak Hotel zoomed to #1 on the Billboard charts, was there for 7 weeks. It also topped the country charts for 17 weeks and became double platinum. Presley went on the Steve Allen Show, and then finally went on the most popular show on television, which was the Ed Sullivan Show. And he was paid an unheard of amount of $50 grand for 3 appearances. And a few months later, Presley debuted on the silver screen in a film that was originally entitled The Reno Brothers, but ended up being something a little bit different. Even though it made absolutely no sense, the title of the movie was changed to another huge hit that Elvis had out at the time that the movie came out. So the movie, instead of being The Reno Brothers, which made sense, became Love Me Tender. And I mean, Deborah Paget, Richard Egan, these are big actors from that day. And Mr. Rock and Roll in the story, he was born to play. I don't know about that, but it was his first movie, and it made him an unabashed, unquestioned superstar. And again, they changed it to Love Me Tender, even though it made no sense at all. 1956 ended with Elvis placing more records in the top 100 than any other artist in a single year since records were first charted. A Wall Street Journal article documented that in 1956, Elvis made $22 million in record sales alone. Do you think he was having a cultural impact or not? Absolutely he was. And part of the Theosophical Society of their mandate was to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. And on the cultural scene, Presley's impact was fantastic, and he began really the first dismantling of the regimented wall of separation between whites and blacks in America. His music transcended color. His music was, it crossed all lines, and it probably was the first time in American history that we actually considered the idea of color blindness. Elvis's music was a powerful force for advancing the lofty ideals of Blavatsky into an everyday reality. And if you doubt this, Sam Phillips, the guy who, discovered Elvis, says that he originally liked Elvis because he was a white man that sounded colored. It may well have been that the music of Elvis Presley was what first encouraged American society to look beyond the color of a man's skin and into the content of his character. And it probably was this which first caused Elvis to come into the crosshairs of the New Age. Again, the Theosophical Society says, let's investigate the unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. And in addition to changing the established idea of racial separation, Elvis was stirring up the pots of individualism and repressed sexuality in the country, shaking gyrations. You know the story. He never did it on purpose. It was never choreographed. I've talked to many of his friends. It was all quite natural. But he was having tremendous effects on young people. He was unintentionally a catalyst for breaking out of long-established societal norms. And he was the lovable rebel. He was kind, generous, polite, but yet at the same time, he was really stirring things up. And it was Ed Sullivan that said, I want to say to the country that Elvis Presley is a real decent, fine boy. And wherever you go, Elvis, we want to say we've never had a pleasanter experience on our show with a big name than we've had with you. So let's have a tremendous hand for a very nice person. I should have played that clip. But Elvis led the country out of the Ozzie and Harriet culture and into a new beginning of self-confidence, individual expression, and fulfillment. And this really was the beginning of the dawn of the age of Aquarius in the United States, and landed him directly, squarely in the crosshairs of the lords of the New Age. Okay, that's going to bring us to the end of our part one on the Elvis and Paul, Angels of Aquarius, 1960s cultural false flag. Make sure you come back tomorrow where we'll pick up. And there's probably going to be 5, 6 parts of this, at least probably 4, because we're going to look tomorrow at the continued meteoric rise of Elvis, his time in the Army, and when he really comes under the crosshairs of MKUltra and Tavistock mind control, what form it took, what happened, and then we'll begin to move into Paul McCartney and how these things all tie together. I'm Jeffrey Daugherty, the Christian Whistleblower, helping you unwind your mind, unindoctrinate yourself, and encouraging you to be your own guru, guide your own spirit, master your own ascension. And hey, let's be excellent to each other.